Jeremy, how are you?
Very good, thanks, and great to be here in Dundee.
Last time I saw you in Dundee was 2018, Scottish Labour Party
That's right.
conference.
I was, yeah.
What would you say if I told you then, 8 years later, you'd be here, new party, establishing itself in Scotland?
I would have said you've got an interesting sense of imagination. But the Labour Party got rid of me. It's not about me. It got rid of a lot of other people, and more importantly, ditched the political principles on which the party was founded and sustained itself. And I, as you know, stood as an independent in 2024 after the Labour members in my constituency had been refused the right to contest the election with me as a candidate, or even consider having me as a candidate. And we won that election, and winning that election convinced me that we can win on the kind of policies that we put forward in that campaign. I have to say, because there are many from Scotland as well, a huge thank you to all those people that came to Islington to help in that election campaign, because I know the time and the personal cost was absolutely huge, but they were absolutely brilliant. I think they all had a good time, by the way.
We had a great time. We had a fantastic time. You're here to found your party in Scotland. In your speech this morning, you talked about a golden thread of socialist ideas that used to run through the Labour Party. Has that thread gone? Has it been cut?
I think it's been cut. That golden thread sustained the party for a very long time. Put it this way, I joined the Labour Party when I was 16. Because I saw it as a vehicle for bringing about change. I saw it as a vehicle that would bring about socialism, which I was learning about and trying to understand at that time. And have there been disappointments? Yes. There's the things I've disagreed with in the Labour Party? Absolutely yes. I mean, from my opposition to the Vietnam War and the Labour government's support for the American policy in Vietnam, right through to Iraq War and so on. But I always felt there was somewhere in the midst of it all, at least a fundamental understanding that we had to have a society based on dealing with people's injustice and dealing with people's needs. But we've now had New Labour, which we managed to turn the tide on New Labour. New Labour brought in market economics into local government, market economics into the health service, and an unbelievably ridiculous support for various US presidents and all the wars they got involved in. We won the leadership in 2015. We managed to produce two manifestos which would have radically changed for the better so much of people's lives across the whole country. Could they have gone further? Yes, and I'm sure they would have done had we carried on. But we didn't. We lost the 2019 election, but I have to say, to those that condemn me and everyone else for losing it, the 2017 and 2019 elections were the two highest votes Labour's got this century. And I have to say, I don't think they're going to be surpassed by the Labour vote at the next general election.
Well, there's a poll out this week that predicts if a general election was held tomorrow, Labour would win just 39 seats. In Scotland, they're polling on 15% in both the regional list and constituency ballots ahead of the Holyrood election. So I suppose the bigger question is Labourism dying as what used to be the muscle memory of the British working class in Scotland and the north of England? Is that political tradition dying?
No, I don't think it is. And it's there in the attitudes and memory of a lot of people. But what I think sometimes the left forget is that memory is not enough. You have to do a bit more than that. And young people are not necessarily brought up in understanding the principles of trade union membership, the principles of what political parties are about. They're brought up into the whole idea that politics is transactional and the information sources can be easily found by just Googling it. So you Google something, you get the answer, end of debate. So you don't look into the historical context of it. I go to quite a lot of schools and colleges, and so I enjoy meeting year 6 students in primary schools, and then usually the sort of GCSE years in the secondary schools, and sometimes sixth form and so on. Sadly, quite often the question I get is, I want to be a politician. I want to follow a political career. What do I do? It's like sort of, I want to be a doctor. What do I do to become a doctor? Or I want to be an accountant. What do I do? And I say, well, you don't do anything, but you, I hope, believe in something, and you spend your life believing in and campaigning for that cause. And if that leads you into a political position, fine. But the being in the political position should not be an end in itself. And they kind of look at me really puzzled and sort of say, well, what kind of application do I need to do? And it's like sort of how to get into Oxford. What's your personal statement? Because that's the key thing to get into Oxford or Cambridge. And I find it very sad that there's this lack of understanding. I was at a school council the other day, and I said, what influence do you have on the school curriculum? And they all kind of looked at each other and looked at the head teacher. The head teacher looked slightly alarmed that I was coming there to promote a different school curriculum. And I think we just need to think a bit more about education. So one thing I did say in my contribution this morning was that once the elections are out of the way and we're underway as a party, branches, etc., etc. But it's also recognising that we've got lots of talents amongst our membership. So I'm proposing that we set up substantial, mainly online policy organisations or commissions. The first one I suggested was on disability, because I think the voice of people with disability should be heard, and they should be the ones looking at the levels of poverty in families with disability. And another one I want is on education. And when I was leader of the Labour Party, we developed the National Education Service idea, and I went to the NEU conference to explain the policy, which would be ending the excessive testing of children and creating a different sort of more, in my view, more imaginative and constructive approach to education, and said we would end Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 testing. I got a standing ovation halfway through the speech. That never happens about something like ending testing on children. And I then had some wonderful discussions with teachers about how they would feel liberated by not having to push their kids through these kind of tests. And I realise it's different in different parts of the UK. But we as your party can become that sort of area of inclusive discussion, because excessive competition in education leads to, yes, great triumphs and success for some students who do get to St Andrews, to Edinburgh, to Glasgow, to Oxbridge or whatever. Yeah, well done. Good luck to them. But what does it do to all the others who at the age of 14 are deftly being told, you're not going to do very well in your hires, you're not going to get very far. Have you ever thought of doing something else? And I don't want us to be depressing kids before they've even left school.
Yeah.
Let's do something better and different, and we can be that influence on it. Now, I don't want to sort of write a prescriptive policy, but those are the sort of things I'm looking at.
You mentioned in your speech as well, you said Margaret Thatcher's never gone away.
Yep.
That excessive testing, that culture of post politics where you don't have the debates and the discussions that maybe you did 40 years ago, is that all a legacy of that Thatcher revolution?
It was given legs, arms and sharp elbows by Margaret Thatcher for sure, but it didn't start there. Jim Callaghan, when he became Prime Minister, essentially tried to turn Labour away from comprehensive schools and comprehensive education in a way that, strangely, Harold Wilson didn't. Harold Wilson was very committed to comprehensive education, open university, and access to education, which was commendable. Callaghan turned away from that. He turned away from it also on industrial policy. And he said, we've got to be a country that reforms education to make it stronger and more competitive. Just like in industry, we've got to back winners, not losers. And so that set the scene for which Thatcher came in May 79. And it then went on from there. And also she marketised education. And that is increasingly the case, that preschool education is largely private. Primary and secondary education is public or publicly available to all. After that, essentially, it's a market that runs it.
Yeah.
Market in colleges and universities.
Yeah, absolutely. You also said in your speech that you had an interesting week in Parliament in reference to Peter Mandelson, and I was reminded of something that a Scottish Labour MP, one of the new intake elected in July 2024, said this week. Gordon McCail said that Peter Mandelson was not part of a wider problem. Is Peter Mandelson just one bad apple?
No, he's not one bad apple. He's absolutely emblematic of the whole problem. Peter Mandelson is the poster boy for the problem. I remember when Mandelson first appeared in Labour politics, it would be about 87 or so. Kinnock brought him in as a media person into the Parliamentary Labour Party. And this was when Kinnock was preparing the party for Aims and Values, which was actually the predecessor of New Labour. And then Tony Benn talked to me about him, and he said, "You know what, old comrade, Mandelson will not do us any good."
He knew.
He was right. And he said, don't trust that man. And, well, I didn't anyway, but it was sort of interesting that Tony spotted. And what Mandelson was good at doing, and he don't underestimate people you don't agree with. He's very smart. He's very well informed. He has a very long and a very good memory. And he knows how to use all the contacts and all the levers. And I just remember watching him grow in operation around Parliament, in the Parliamentary Labour Party and so on. And he instilled a sort of sense of almost fear in a lot of Labour MPs. Don't cross Peter, otherwise you'll be in trouble. And so he didn't actually have to do anything to get influence, because he had it because they all believed he had influence. And so it was a sense, an ever-growing con, and he was very good at it. And then when Blair became leader, I've never forgotten it, that John Smith died, obviously shocking and devastating. And I knew John, obviously. I got on personally quite well with him. Did we agree politically and everything? No, not at all. He'd once been Tony Benn's deputy in one of the departments Tony was Secretary of State for, and Tony said he was competent and loyal as a deputy, which is interesting because politically he didn't really agree with Tony. And so anyway, John died, and devastation, tributes and so on being paid. And then a lot of Labour MPs were just sitting around in Parliament in sort of silence because from memory, I think the sitting was suspended that day, or should have been anyway, I think it was. And then about 3:30 in the afternoon, word starts going round, and people saying, well, what would we do now? And I thought any discussion of the future was totally inappropriate when John hadn't even been buried. And they said, well, the word is that Blair will be the successor. And I said to the person that told me this, well, I would have thought, not exactly my cup of tea, but I would have thought Gordon Brown is the more likely success. They said, no, it's got to be Blair. And I said, how do you know? They said, Mandelson just told us.
So he was at the core of...
Absolutely at the core.
Right
from the
through.
very beginning. And he did a lot to influence Blair. And remember the several key moments. One of them was that Labour would not change the existing taxation and spending policies of the outgoing Tory government. And that was in 97. And I remember canvassing in my constituency, Labour was doing very well. We were clearly going to win and so on. And I just remember on one estate I went to, a woman comes to the door. She said, yeah, Jeremy, sure. Yeah, I'll vote for you. No problem. Always have. Yeah, fine. She said, can you just answer me one question? I said, no, what would that be then? She said, if Labour's going to change things, this Blair guy, if he's going to change things, how's he going to do it if he doesn't change the taxation and finance policies of the government?
It's a good question.
Very good question. Very smart question too.
Yeah.
And then when it became obvious that the sort of strategy they were following on PFI, Building Schools for the Future, etc., all of that, Mandelson was then asked about wealth, and he said, we're totally relaxed about the filthy rich.
A bit too relaxed.
Yeah.
Why does Starmer keep him around? Why do you think Starmer kept him around?
He helped Starmer get elected. He advised Starmer, and Starmer's leadership strategy was clever. He knew that the policies on which we'd fought the 17 and 19 elections were individually popular with the public. Opinion polling showed all of them, public ownership, etc. All of them carried a majority. And he advised Starmer to stick to the policies but get rid of Corbyn and all his mates. And so Starmer then said he would essentially keep the policies. And he then went on, which is very surprising, particularly to me, to announce that I was apparently his best friend. That was interesting. So I remembered that one. And then proceeded to ditch the policies and try and expel me from the Labour Party.
The actions of a best friend.
Sometimes friends apparently got to take a hit.
It would seem so. The Peter Mandelson scandal sits within a broader set of revelations, the latest Epstein files. This crisis for the British ruling class and the American ruling class happening at the same time as the world order's changing, as the world as it's been constructed for 70 years is changing. Those two things aren't distinct, really, are they? The Mandelson crisis, the Epstein files are evidence of a deep decay within our ruling class, America's ruling class.
Epstein is a product of a monetarized economy. The idea that the only thing that matters is making money, which is what Reagan and Thatcher did, and indeed what Milton Friedman did. So it's that whole monetarist idea that it's not what you make or what you do that matters, it's the amount of money you make out of it, and what you do with the money afterwards is your business. So if that leads to poverty, inequality, unemployment, and everything, well, that's just life. There's no vision of anything other than that. Epstein, clearly clever, made vast amounts of money, and somehow or other developed this golden network of cronies who were prepared to help him, support him, bail him out, because he could then offer them dazzling weekends on islands in the Caribbean, private jets, and then the most disgusting exploitation of young girls and women, most disgusting exploitation of young people, and utterly criminal behaviour towards them. And they all felt the amount of money they got, they could get away with it. So you have this vision of these abominable sort of weekend or week-long parties on a remote island where apparently anything goes. You can do anything you like, you can eat anything you like, you can drink anything you like, you can do anything you like to these young women that have been brought in to be the entertainment of these horrible men. And they all thought they could get away with it and that nobody would ever know about it. In a sense, they've been found out by technology.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure this sort of thing has gone on in the past.
No.
But in the past, there wasn't internet, there wasn't emails. And if people wanted to communicate with each other, they either met them or wrote them a letter. Well, you can't discover things in the same way and speed as that. And so they've been found out by that. And I'm glad they have been found out.
That principle that they can get away with whatever they like, the anything goes stuff is exactly what informs other things that we're witnessing take place in the world today as well, Venezuela as an example, might is right. Are those two things?
Yeah, we had post Second World War at least a concept that you could have international law, a concept that the UN would play a role. Now, I'm not to say the UN has been 100% successful. Obviously, it hasn't. But there are areas it has worked. It has improved human rights around the world. It has done an awful lot in those kind of areas, particularly cultural areas and so on. Trump has essentially torn all this up. Now, Trump is a product of monetarism, but also he knows full well how to exploit images of nationalism. So his whole policy has been to pretend he's nothing to do with Wall Street, when in fact he's absolutely everything to do with Wall Street. To pretend he's nothing to do with the super rich and exploitation of Rust Belt towns, and it's nothing to do with him. It's complete nonsense. It's everything to do with him. But he's very clever, presents this image that he's only interested in MAGA, Make America Great Again. And he's been very successful at doing that. And globally, he's not interested in international law, has no idea what it is, no concern about it whatsoever. So his concern is that America's got to be made greater than it is. And fails to appreciate that the US is the most indebted country in the world, spends more on weapons and armaments than almost the rest of the world combined. What is it? More than a third of all weapons expenditure across the whole planet is by the USA, and he proposes to double that if he can get away with it. And then on Venezuela, he just says, I'm going to get rid of Maduro because I want to prove I can do it. And used the argument that he did about alleged drug exports and so on from Venezuela, of which there is not much evidence anyway. And he's done that. He's also developed the Trump doctrine on the national security strategy in his work. I advise anyone to read it, actually. It's very well written, very comprehensive, and devastating. It's absolutely clear. Anything in the Western Hemisphere, it's ours. We'll do what we like. And any, what he calls foreign influences, for which I assume he means Venezuela and Cuba, primarily, to some extent Mexico, and then some of the Caribbean islands. I would have thought he's probably not very happy with Barbados at the moment, for example, but there are others. He gets away with it there. And he then goes on to say that in the case of Africa, which is the most mineral-rich continent by far, that the US will go in where it needs to because it needs the minerals, like Greenland and so on. But interestingly, it's 1984-ish in the sense that he says, we're here, we're very big and very powerful. We know there are other groups that are quite powerful, but not as powerful as us, namely China and Russia. And so he sees a sort of eternal three-way conflict between them. What he forgets is that the US has fewer natural resources than any other because they've exploited them so rapidly, that it has a debt level which is in the multiples of trillions on a federal debt level, and it has very low levels of personal savings. China, on the other hand, is the absolute mirror opposite of no national debt, massive national surplus, huge reserves of foreign and convertible currency, leading nation within BRICS, and as a leading nation within BRICS is developing its own unit of currency. And so he knows full well the rivalry is coming. Is this the start, literally, of a war over trade? So it's all almost 19th century.
Yeah.
You know, it's the big powers fighting over markets.
Yeah. And in that same national security strategy, he talks about Europe, and he talks explicitly about sponsoring right-wing parties across Europe. We've already had Elon Musk speaking at Tommy Robinson rallies in this country, for example. The political climate we're talking about, this very volatile international and domestic climate, is the context in which you've launched your party.
Mm-hmm.
Is now the right time?
Yes, absolutely the right time. Labour won the last election in the UK on what I would only describe as a loveless landslide. They won a lot of seats on the basis of very low votes and a lower turnout than previous elections. And in government have absolutely been dragged kicking and screaming to do the absolute minimum on workers' rights and renters' rights and benefits. But essentially, it's a government that's presiding over a new round of austerity, more privatisation, more private finance initiative, and so on. And so I think that Labour's prospects electorally are somewhere around the 0 mark. I don't know what the current level of Labour Party membership is. All I know is that in January 2020 it was 600,000. I would wager it's less than a third of that now, much less than a third of that now. And I hear that in my own constituency, they're now merging branches because they can't get enough people to attend meetings. 5 years ago, my constituency had 5,000 members of the Labour Party. 5,000 in one constituency.
Yeah.
And that is a massive number for any one area. All that's gone. Your party, yes, we've had a rocky start. I'm looking for the book on how to form a political party, and I couldn't find one anywhere, so I might write one. Yeah, but we'll get through all that. We'll have the elections. We'll set up a central executive committee. We will then establish branches all over. We will have the autonomous organisations in Scotland and Wales. And I'm very determined to have all the policy commissions. Fighting elections, yes, of course, but elections are not an end in themselves, and that is where we want to get across this. We've got to be the party that's part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So when the council is trying to close a nursery, we're going to be there with the people keeping that nursery open. When the community is demanding more open space and a new park, we're going to be there with them. When there's demand to develop job creation exercises or whatever in a community, will be part of that. So I want us to be part of that, and that each branch has at least one open monthly meeting where everybody can come along, whoever they are. They might come along and disagree with us. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because the problem, or one of the problems of the left is they love discussing political theory. Good, that's fine. But you can't do that forever, and you can't do that alone.
Yeah.
You have to move on into what you actually do to put that theory into practice. It's not easy, I know it's not, but we don't need to be internalized or internal all the time. And that, I'm saying to people, is we've got the elections. When they're done, get over it, move on, and bring everybody in on it. And policy commissions on, as I said, disability, education, health, housing, international relations, and particularly international relations. And I'll just say this, that Trump is tearing up the global order. The nuclear agreement between Russia and the USA has now just expired. There is no nuclear agreement now. Maybe Trump just wants the idea that he and Russia and China will negotiate things and run the world together. I'm not sure that can work. And so we need to support the peace organizations that are calling for nuclear disarmament, support the global ban treaty, which I absolutely do. And I went to Japan to be part of the conference in Hiroshima on a nuclear ban treaty, which was moving. And I'm going to New York at the end of April for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review, which will be discussing the global ban. So we've got a role, not in taking over and running other organizations, God forbid. No, we're not doing that. What we're doing is working with others. So we'll work with C&D, we'll work with the peace organizations, with Stop the War Coalition, and on all those organizations. And in my own organization, Peace and Justice Project, we put on the Gaza Tribunal. I'm very proud of that work. We're publishing it all very soon. And we see ourselves as a cultural basis and a political basis of promoting ideas and organization. We're not a political party, but our 2-day policy conference last year was amazingly successful. So we'll be there, and obviously we'll be part and parcel of what goes on in your party, but your party has got to develop on its own, and it's going to.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it.
You're talking about building a whole infrastructure where the Labour Party's left, really. A whole, talked about that that the decline of Labourism, you're talking about building something
Yeah.
new in its place.
Yeah, a lot are going to come across from Labour anyway.
Yeah.
And you must find, I'm sure anyone watching this podcast will know perfectly well, there's many people who've been very active in the Labour Party will now come across. And in Parliament, I obviously work with my colleagues in the Independent Alliance Group, which is interesting because we'd never met before we got elected. We didn't know each other. And so I phoned them all up and said, would you like to come in for a cup of tea in my office? So we put the tea on the table. They all came in and we just started talking to each other. We all come from different experiences and different backgrounds. We're all there because of our politics. We're there. The one thing that totally united us from the very beginning was Palestine and Gaza, of course. And day to day, I do cooperate with the Labour left. I do cooperate with the Greens, with Plaid Cymru, with the SNP and so on. And if there's a vote coming up, we sort of go around and see what we can do and negotiate with people.
Yeah.
So that's how you have to do it.
That's how you have to do it. I think we'll leave it there because we're running out of time. Jeremy
Thank
Corbyn,
you very
thanks
much.
very much.
My pleasure.